schools. I've been in this role for about 8 years. We are a voluntary membership association of Episcopal schools all over the provinces of the Episcopal Church from preschool through grade 12. Our membership includes very small preschools right through to very, very large K-12s of over 1,000 students. I've been here for 8 years, and prior to coming to NAES, I was the head of a parish day school of pre-K through 8th grade that was one corporation with its parish and had a fairly complex embedded life together. So I have walked the walk that you have walked. I worked with two rectors and an interim during my 12 years as school head. And a lot of the work that I do here at the association is to help schools and churches come to know one another better, live out their common mission, understand how they're the same, how they're different, and to assist them in their shared life. So today I'm going to offer a very basic orientation in and for some reason my screen is not moving. I am afraid I don't seem to be able to move my slides.
You should be able to either use your arrow on your keyboard, or it should be on the lower part of your screen. We'll be able to advance the slides.
We should have practiced this. Let me try a different way of doing this. This one seems to like it better. There you go. So this is a picture of me and my contact information, and I'll also be able to share that with you at the end. So let's jump right in. I'm really going to go over these following components. The nature of Episcopal Parish Day School, so that you can put your own school in the context of this larger group of schools. Some of the inherent tensions in the church-school relationship, and it is a relationship that is just inbuilt with some just natural conflicts, both joys and challenges, and understanding what these are can really pave the way to simply work better together as partners. What's the nature of church-school relationship and governance? What really should be the role of the vestry? What's the role of a school committee or a school board? And how do you make those two bodies work together well? And then finally, what are some really on-the-ground practical tips and tools from other schools and other parishes that have seemed to have worked and smoothed the way along? We will have, as I say, some question and answer time at the end of each of these sections. So I'm going to jump right in by talking a little bit about the history and the character of Episcopal Parish Day Schools. So there are about 1,000 Episcopal schools in the provinces of the Episcopal Church. I would urge you on this map to locate where you are and find out with the little chart to the left and the numbers, whether you're in a part of the world that has a lot of Episcopal schools or perhaps not so many. Many people are surprised to find out that the 3 states with the largest number of Episcopal schools are Florida, Texas, and California. If you are in an area of the country that has a lot of Episcopal schools, I'd urge you to get to know them, even if they're not exactly like you, even if they're an elementary school or maybe even a big K-12. And if you're in a part of the country where you might be a solo player or the only Episcopal school for miles around, I encourage you to find ways to have relationships with us, and we can connect you to other schools like you. The other piece is that the largest number of Episcopal schools, in fact, are parish day schools. Over half of our membership are parish day schools. And we have so many of these because there was really something called the parish day school movement. Many of our schools are 50, 60, 70 years old. And that's because that in the post-World War II years of the baby boom, there really was a great, not only church planting, which is why you see Florida, Texas, and California, but school plantings. A group of parishioners might get together, lots of young children, and say, gee, wouldn't it be great if we had a preschool or if we had an Episcopal school so that we can educate our children in a particular kind of way? And on the lower left there, you'll see the picture of, the 10 kids in the parish hall in 1957. Probably most of them parishioners. But then this became very, very successful. Many of these schools grew, they added grades, or they grew horizontally. In the upper right, you'll see a groundbreaking for a school building. Now life gets a little more complicated that we have a school building. And what's happened over the last 50 or 60 years is that, in fact, in many cases, what started as this cute little parish program turned into a bit of a supertanker in many cases. Whether it became a larger preschool, perhaps it became a K-8. We even have large K-12 schools that started just like this back in, say, 1959. One of the things I would urge you as parish leaders is to know the history of your school. When was it founded? Why was it founded? Who were the founders and what did they think? How has the population of the school changed over time? Today, it's more common that the school is often larger than the parish in budget, in staff, in the number of regulations. And maybe it could be that you have more children coming to chapel than you may have parishioners coming on Sunday. You also have the reverse, where you may have a preschool that has shrunk a little bit, and it used to be the place in town, and now there's lots of competition, and perhaps it's struggling a bit. It's really important to understand where your school came from and why it is the way it is, especially if you're new. The second thing is that today's Episcopal schools are highly varied. They're small, they're big, they're new, they're old, they're co-ed, single sex, but they are a very, very vibrant educational sector. In fact, people are starting Episcopal preschools and non-preschools still. It's a growing sector. And it is a highly professionalized sector. And I would say that's probably one of the biggest changes in the last 50 years. That cute little preschool now has a development office, an admissions office, a CFO, a large staff. They have sophisticated marketing. And sometimes it can feel that perhaps the school is the tail wagging the dog when it comes to parish programming or perhaps space needs or financial imbalances. But it's a highly vibrant sector. And again, understanding the larger context of Episcopal schools can help your vestry, your church leadership be more effective in understanding why the school is the way it is and why it might want to operate in a certain way or need to operate in a certain way. And by the way, we do the same thing with school leaders about parishes and church life, so they understand why they have to learn about parishes and vestries and the great rich tradition of the Episcopal Church, which is the school is founded on and lives into. So with all of this in mind, here at NAES, we say the most important reason to have a school is because the parish sees this as a way of reaching outward into the world to shape children in a particular way, in a human formation that is consistent with the values and principles of the Episcopal Church. We sometimes have parishes that come to us, and perhaps they hope that the school might be a way to solve a financial issue at the parish. Perhaps they feel that the school could or should be a way to grow the parish, more people coming on Sunday. Or there may be a little bit of disappointment or even anger. We have this school and it takes up so much space, and those people aren't even Episcopalian and they're not coming to church. Why do we have this school? So I would say that there are fabulous missional reasons to continue to have a school as part of your parish's life. However, it really has to be because you believe in this mission-centered purpose. The money, the growing of the church, not so much. Certainly you'll share expenses and it can be a defraying aspect, but our experience is that this is a seesaw that goes in and out of balance. Sometimes the school needs the church, sometimes the church needs the school. So the mission is at the heart of it. A good question to ask of your parish and your school is, are we both on the same page about how this school matters as an exemplar, as an embodiment of what we stand for as a Christian community? So if Episcopal schools are a manifestation, a missional manifestation of the church, what does that look like? This is perhaps one of the most common questions we get here at NAES because a school is not a parish. And I'm going to talk right now about the distinctive qualities of Episcopal schools. As I walk through these qualities, I would urge you to be thinking about your own school and where you see these qualities in your school, or where perhaps they may have faded or been lost in the shuffle somewhere as the school and the parish have had their journey together. These three elements, honoring God as the center of life, proclaiming the dignity of all human beings, and striving for justice and peace, are very much grounded in the baptismal covenant in the Book of Common Prayer. Now, when we talk about honoring and worshiping God as the center of life, this does not mean that our schools are monasteries where everyone is praying 7 times a day. It does mean that we are always mindful of the fact that we are all here for a higher purpose, that we are all here because we are created by a loving God who loves us no matter what, and that we also have an obligation to live into that promise of, that God has offered us as a possibility in our human condition to experience the divine and to experience the presence of God in our lives. And so in school, we are reminded and we circle back in our school life to the presence of God and our purpose here on earth. Proclaiming the dignity of all human beings, gosh, it really all schools should do that. But in Episcopal schools, this is this notion that we are all children of God. And on our good days and our bad days, and when we love each other and when we make each other absolutely crazy, we retain that dignity of each person. And the last is striving for justice and peace. This is very critical to Episcopal schools because it could speak to our mission, to our policies and financial aid. It can also simply speak to the way that we engage students in questions that other schools might think are political. But as Episcopal schools, they're not political. They're part of healing a world and making the world a more peaceful and just place. And so we can do that work in a way that perhaps a secular school cannot. Now, these we talk about getting down from the heavenly to the earthly. These are 3 qualities that we say distinguish a school as Episcopal. On our website, we have a statement that is our seminal statement. It's open to anybody to look at, and many of our schools use it for a conversation about what it means to be an Episcopal school. The first is we're inclusive and diverse. The Episcopal Church welcomes you. Anyone can walk through the door of an Episcopal church, and no one is going to give them 3 questions they have to answer before they're allowed to, participate in worship. Our schools are the same. We want lots of different kinds of people, be they Christian or non-Christian, be they firm believers or on a journey, be they doubters, doesn't matter. We think the more the merrier. The more ideas, the more perspectives, the more lives we touch, the better. We're all on a journey together. This is one of the reasons why Episcopal schools today are incredibly diverse communities on the basis of religion, on the basis of culture, ethnicity, race, etc. This leads into the Anglican tradition of reason and open inquiry, and perhaps distinguishes our schools from some of our other Christian denominational schools. We're a place where all questions are okay. We believe God gave us a mind to ask and answer ultimate questions. We believe reason is a gift, very much in the tradition of the three-legged stool of Anglicanism. And the last is that we've got lots of traditions and lots of rites, just as the church does. This is a gathering church, a coming together with lots of ways that we embody our community life, both in song, in hymn, in worship, in community, in symbol. And our schools do the same thing. They might do them a little bit differently, but they do them. So again, we believe that Episcopal schools are quite distinctive in this way, in these particular characteristics, not quite like our Quaker brothers and sisters, not quite like our Catholic brothers and sisters, or like some of our other Christian academies or Christian faith-based schools that really want to make sure everybody does have a particular point of view when they walk in the door. So what might this look like on the ground, day in, day out? How would you name it and claim it, so to speak? These are what we call the 4 pillars of Episcopal identity in a school. It's a really great exercise to sit down with your church and school leadership team, put these 4 out on the table, and just do an inventory of how do we live into these in our school life. It can sometimes come as a surprise to parish leaders that the school is doing as much as it's doing, and it may be a great way to identify gaps or areas that you might want to give more attention to. Chapel and worship. All of our schools normally have some kind of chapel worship time. Preschools, elementary schools, K-12 schools. It will look different and feel different than what happens on Sunday because their children needs to be developmentally appropriate because they have to go. Wouldn't it be wonderful if you could just force everyone to go to church? Fabulous. And it's going to vary from school to school. However, it needs to be sacred time in the tradition or in the format and tradition of the Episcopal Church. Imagine if on a Sunday you had 200 congregants, but they were all between the ages of 5 and 10. You'd have to do a different kind of a service than write 1 or write 2. Ethos and community. Schools are places where relationships matter. In Episcopal schools, they should really matter. And it's not just about the relationships between the students and themselves or between teachers and students. It's about relationships between parents in the school, parents and one another, that we are cultivating a notion that we are here together as a community at all times. Episcopal schools should excel. We often hear from our schools that the quality of relationships and the quality of community is what they are most proud about. And in many ways, it is one of the things that is also part of their Episcopal identity. Pastoral care, how we handle families in distress and difficulty, students that are going through a difficult time, the death of a goldfish, for a 3-year-old, or the death of a parent. Religious studies and spiritual formation. All Episcopal schools should in some way be attending to these things. Religious studies in an Episcopal school is an academic subject. In some schools, it has more of a Christian studies focus. In other schools, it may be broader to encompass lots of different religious traditions, but it is not about catechism. Is not catechetical or about creating more Christians. It is about giving all students a rich exposure to the great thinking around religion and theology, including Christian theology and the Bible. There should also be an opportunity for students to explore their own spiritual formation. What kind of a journey are they on? What is their story in their relationship to God? Be that as a practicing Christian, a seeker, a Jewish family, a Hindu family, or a mixed up with everybody family. One educator once said to me, he said, my kids say that he's a cashew. I said, what's a cashew? She said, half Catholic, half Jewish. I'm a cashew. And the last is service and social justice. Part of our Episcopal heritage is to serve our neighbors, to love our neighbors as ourselves, to make the world a more just and equitable place. In Episcopal schools, this work is not an add-on, an if you like, a Saturdays and weekends outside of school. It should be integrated into the life of the school in an age-appropriate way. So one thing I would ask you to do is to think about all 4 of these as equally valid expressions of your school's Episcopal identity. And what normally happens is schools are stronger in some areas than others. Fabulous service and social justice, amazing ethos and community. Religious studies, meh. Or vibrant chapel program, or maybe no chapel program. Well, we've not done children's chapel in our preschool forever, but my gosh, you wouldn't believe how great the faculty and the parents are with the kids. And we pray at meals, and we do graces, and we do birthday blessings, but we haven't really gone down the children's chapel route. The last thing I'm going to say before we stop for Q&A is, in our experience at NAES, there are kind of 2 different ways you can get a handle on this notion of Episcopal identity. One are these overt symbols and traditions that you can really point to and name and claim. And the other are kind of more of a marinade, cultural norms, a feeling that you get in the school, values that the school embodies. Again, both of these are ways that we express being an Episcopal school. In my experience, in terms of church-school relations, parishes tend to look at the left-hand side as the primary indicator of the strength of a school's Episcopal identity. Are there chapel? Do they study the Bible? Is there scripture? And then they overlook the cultural norms that are also very, very important. In schools, you may run the danger that the symbols and traditions are there, but they're a chew them up and spit them out kind of place. They've abandoned the cultural norms. So, okay, we all go to chapel and we all study religion, but after that, we're just a regular old run-of-the-mill school who, like, isn't very, we're sort of, creating crispy critters instead of loving children for who they are. So here are some of the visible symbols and traditions. And again, at your school, what are those? Make a list of them. Make sure people know what they are. Even something like a school tradition, the children say grace before they eat lunch in the preschool. Does the parish know that? Or we have a prayer list for school families. Or we have a great service learning program. So what are your visible symbols and traditions? And the second is, what are your cultural norms? And these are some of the cultural norms we talk about: gentleness, patience, dignity, joy, wonder, the glory and wonder of God's creation, offering blessings. These are theological words. Joy is not happiness. Um, Courage is not the same as achievement. Where in your school culture are you holding up gospel values? Whether the school is Christians or non-Christians, or the faculty are Christians or non-Christians, or Episcopalians or Catholics or Lutherans, are there ways that you are embodying these precious and so important Christian and specifically Episcopal Church language? It's great to go and use some of these words in the way the school is talked about. Faith people, Christians, convicted Christian families who are practicing and deep in their faith, love blessings. And you know what? So do the spiritual but not religious. I haven't seen anybody that denies a blessing, trust me. And there aren't very many schools where you can give blessings. So are you giving blessings? I'm going to stop here and ask you, if you have your chat tool, do you have any questions about, I know I talk really fast, if you have any questions or comments about anything I've said where you would like to get me to answer them before I move into the nature of the church-school relationship and why it can sometimes not be as smooth as we would rather like. And Brendan, I'm going to have to ask you to moderate those for me, since I don't seem to have my chat open at this moment.
Sure, not to worry. So just as a reminder to everyone participating in the webinar itself, to open up your chat box, if you haven't done that already, go to the upper left-hand side of your screen and press the chat button. That'll open up a box that will allow you to type in your questions and comments. If you'd like to speak your question and do that, we have a size group that I am comfortable with doing that, and you can raise your hand and I'll be happy to switch your mode over so that you could speak as well. And a final note to those out there, since this is one of the other nifty features that we have, is that this is also being live streamed over Facebook. And for those who are tuning in over Facebook, I also have that open so that if you want to type your questions in over Facebook, I can relay those over to Anne as well. But I do know that questions may come to you later on, and please feel free to put those in at any point during the presentation.
Yes, because this notion of how the school expresses its Episcopal identity can sometimes be a head scratcher for folks, either who are mostly school people and may not be as familiar with the Episcopal part, or for faithful Episcopalians, lay or clergy, who may wonder why the school, why do they do chapel this way and not that way? Or the school isn't very Episcopal, or whatever it might be. So feel free to ask a question about that.
And actually, Anne, if you if you're not already going to be going into this later in your presentation, I'd be curious if you have any particular things that you've seen that you think are really interesting ways or creative ways that schools have shared what they're doing when you're talking about praying before lunch, or having a prayer list, or ways that schools have shared and communicated these messages to their the congregations.
I am a huge fan of the head of school or early childhood director writing regularly in the parish newsletter and writing about something about the school that can speak to parishioners about the way the school is living out its Episcopal mission. whether it's just telling a story of something that happened, talking about the prayer practices of the school. I think it's really, really important that the head of school's voice be in those publications on a regular basis, and that's a great way to do it. The other way to do it, which is really wonderful, is it's great if there can be a bulletin board in the place where people gather regularly for coffee hour, and if the school can be intentional about putting up displays that speak to that. Photographs of the children doing service, photographs of student chapel, talking about the 8th grade retreat and what happened at the 8th grade retreat. When I was a head of a school, an Episcopal school, I preached in church at least once a year. And I was the preacher, the lay preacher, and I talked about how the school connected and why the parish should feel that this is their school. And people love to see me, participating in liturgy, not simply sitting in the pew, but actually participating in liturgy and offering my thoughts. The last is that I believe that it's great if the head of school and or board chair, if you have a board, which you probably should, that's a different topic, present at the annual meeting of the congregation and give a school report to the congregation that includes not just money and how many children, but includes a description or a talk about what the school has done in the past year that makes it proud of its connection as an Episcopal school. The last thing for vestries and rectors is it can be really important to have an orientation for all of your new vestry members and a tour of the school or a vestry visiting day where they can walk around the school, invite them to a chapel, and one comment about inviting people to chapel. If the school says, oh, well, we tell people they can come to chapel whenever they want, and nobody comes. Well, if you say to the vestry, here's 4 chapels this year, pick one to come to. We think they're going to be particularly great for you to see the children in worship in these times. People love specific invitations. Please come and offer the blessing. Please come and join us at the faculty opening party, cocktail party, and meet our teachers. So those are just a few ideas that can help.
Those are great. Thank you, Anne.
So I'm going to move into this question about the inherent tensions of churches and schools. So here we have this very happy congregation and school right next to each other. And they're great missional partners, parishes and schools. But as you can see right away, they really have very different energies, schedules, constituencies, and ways of being. I will guarantee you that when either one of those bells ring, from time to time, the other party can feel it was really inconvenient when the school bell rings or when the church bell rings. So how can we have these two communities live side by side? So the inherent tension is they're really different. And I always say an apple and a pineapple walk into a room. They have the word apple in their name, but that does not mean that they're alike in any way, shape, or form, except that they're fruits. And churches and schools can feel like that. Why? The first reason is that they're incredibly busy places that are running on a very, very lean staff. So the natural condition of a church or a school is people get pulled into that work and that community. It's just the way it is. Rectors and vestries are busy, parishioners are there on evenings and weekends, teachers are running as fast as they can. The other piece is that they're completely different schedules. Churches tend to operate on evenings and weekends, and school is in session on weekdays. So there's no natural reason why you should know much about each other. You're not even around at the same time. The rector's there and knows, the school head may be there and know, and if you have a few crossover parent parishioners, but you can just beat ships that pass in the night. And this is a natural condition. Don't feel bad about it. Don't think there's something bizarre about your own church and school if this happens. It's going to happen. What's this blue part in the middle? The blue part in the middle is your shared mission and your shared life. So this is the blue part you have to pay attention to. Now, there's a lot of reasons why churches and schools aren't the same. And I want to go through just a few of those in about 4 minutes because they're really important. By not understanding the differences between these two organizations, they'll misread each other all the time. And not because anybody's mean or anybody's trying to make life difficult. They just don't understand how their partner is going to view something. And this can happen, that nefarious school, the nefarious church. No one's nefarious. They just don't know what they don't know. So the first thing is, congregations are about religious formation. They're very personal communities. People come, they want to pursue their Christian calling, be shaped. Clergy have gone into this for a very personal reason. Schools are about education. Okay, they're Episcopal. That's great. It's great to be Episcopal, but they're about education. And education is fundamentally a secular undertaking. So right away, 90% of what a school does is secular, and 90% of what a church does is religious. The second thing about, I always get a pushback on my second one here, and I'm not going to go through all of these, but people say, oh, my congregation isn't 100% Episcopalian. In fact, there's hardly any Episcopalians in my congregation. They're either came over from another denomination or they're thinking about becoming Episcopalian. But what I mean by 100% Episcopalian is when you walk through the door of an Episcopal church on a Sunday, and certainly if you join the parish, you're kind of on board with the idea that you're joining a Christian community of a specific denominational identity and theology. But the school is going to be probably 85% or more non-Episcopalian. And that is typical of our schools. There are a very small number of schools, mostly preschools, where you might have 50 or 60% of the families are Episcopalian or maybe even are parishioners. It's typically way, way, way below that. 10%, 15%. And there's a few reasons for that. Number one, there aren't that many Episcopalians. There are as many Episcopalians as there are Roman Catholics in the Diocese of Chicago. So yes, the Diocese of Chicago has as many Roman Catholics as all the Episcopalians put together. The second thing is that people are attracted to our school for lots of reasons, including our Episcopal identity. And the third is that, remember what I said at the beginning? We exist to serve all kinds of people. So we welcome all kinds of people. A good question to ask yourselves is, what is the religious makeup of the community within which your school operates? Is it largely Roman Catholic in places like New Orleans? Is it largely people going to mega churches or perhaps more evangelical churches? Are you in the great spiritual but not religious, the NONESs, where they love your school but they're really nothing? Are they what we call the Christmas Easter Christians, where, yeah, I'm Christian. Yeah, we do Christmas and Easter. Too much soccer on Sunday. The third one I can't emphasize enough. A school is a contracted fee for service. People sign an enrollment contract. They're paying tuition dollars. Those dollars have to be spent on the education of the children, and if they don't pay their bill, we can dun them. We can fail to enroll their child. We can give them a dunning notice. The congregation runs on stewardship. Most churches run on stewardship. Rectors, how wonderful it would be if you could bill the congregants. You could say, this is how much it's going to cost. You're going to pay it at this time of the year. And if you don't pay, you don't get to come to church. So basically, a congregation's running on the annual fund. What this means in practice is two most important things. The school has a much regular cash flow, knows when it's going to get its money, comes in and is ready to roll. Church has to wait. Please pay your pledge. Cash flow in a church is really different. The other piece is that the school has an obligation to deliver a service. No one is going to sue the church for bad sermons. No one's going to sue the church because they don't like the flower arrangements or they didn't think they picked the right hymns. But people will go after the school if you said you were going to educate my child in XYZ way and you didn't. So it's really important that congregations understand that schools are really subject to this. And it's important that schools understand that they can't just turn around and expect their church to hop to and pay for something. Schools are really accountable to secular agencies. If their accrediting agency or the fire department says, as of tomorrow, you have to have sprinklers, as of tomorrow, you have to have sprinklers. You can't pray on it, think on it, put it before the parish, add it into the next strategic plan. It's got to go. It's got to happen. Boom. The congregations are accountable to the church, the general convention, the diocesan canons and constitutions. And so the congregations are looking more to the church for what it must conform to, and schools are looking to secular authorities. You need to have, a fire 16 fire drills, you better have 16 fire drills. If your school is a preschool, most highly regulated sector in education is early childhood. Background checks, fingerprinting, temperatures of refrigerators. At my school, if the refrigerator broke, it had to be fixed that day because we were legally obligated to have a temperature in our refrigerator at all times of blah, blah temperature. We couldn't just say, well, we'll do it next week. I've talked about voluntary pledges. The other really key difference is the balance between volunteers and professional staff. Most churches want to drive their program on volunteers, the work of the people. Congregation is the work of the people. You want to tap the gifts of the congregation, right? You don't want professional staff doing everything and people are just coming on Sunday, coming in and out. So in churches, you tend to have a small staff and a lot of volunteers who do real concrete, like hands-on things. They teach Sunday school. They balance the checkbooks maybe, or they at least, look at the line details. They're setting things up. They're breaking things down. A school, almost everything in a school is delivered by a professional. Of course, there's parent volunteers who help out with fundraising or events or chaperoning field trips, but almost everything is delivered by a professional. And that means the school tends to have a lot more employees than the church, a bigger payroll than the church, and it has a professionally driven program. So in a congregation, going on to the next moment, who elects the vestry? The congregation does. Who belongs to all the committees? Congregants do, right? If the church wants to think about, should we have a food pantry or should we have a preschool? You want to vet that with the congregation. You want to have focus groups and have reports and have transparency. A school is run by the board and the professional staff. Parents can offer their suggestions, but the parents don't vote the budget. They don't vote the tuition. They don't decide whether we're going to teach French or Spanish or Chinese, or whether it's going to be Singapore math or everyday math. Those are all professional decisions that are made. And so you have a real big difference in how we communicate with our constituencies. And I'll give you a really good example. Church and school want to do a strategic plan. They want to get it together. The school wants to, I won't say a strategic plan. Let me make another example. The vestry puts in the regular newsletter a summary of the vestry meeting, and anybody can go to the vestry meeting. And in some congregations, they might even share the entire minutes of the vestry meeting. Never in a million years would you do that in a school. Only the board goes to the board meetings, period, end of conversation. The minutes are for the board, period, end of conversation. And no one sees the minutes other than the board, period, end of conversation. The board will communicate its decisions. It should talk to its constituents. It should share what the board's doing. But no parent can just say, hey, I want to come to the board meeting. They're closed meetings. This can be a real conflict between a board and a parish if they don't understand their different governance structures and why they operate the way they do. So it's so easy to lose the center in this relationship. It's easy to misread each other, and it's easy to lose the center because you're busy, you're different places, you're off doing your work, and there you have the rector and the vestry and the head of the board, and everything shared just gets lost. I want you to look at the white space. All of those things can disrupt your relationship. If any of these things have happened in your parish and school relationship, or are happening, or are about to happen, be prepared for that to stress the relationship. Look at this list. Any of these things that have gone on, I'd say in the last 10 years, or are about to happen, or are happening, be prepared for tension because they stress the relationship. Be very mindful of leadership transitions. You have a new head or a new rector, really have to onboard them well. Parish is going through a search. Parish searches last forever. Couple of years you have an interim. How's the school going to plan while you have an interim? Parish is growing. Great. But maybe you have new space pressures now. Parish is contracting. Oops, we don't have enough money. There's an imbalance. School has a lot of money, parish doesn't. Why does that school have all that money? School doesn't have money, parish does. Aren't we a mission? Shouldn't you be paying everything for us? The last two are really important. Boards and vestries change membership. And without attention to educating both those groups, they will pretend they think they know, and then they'll be surprised. The board will say, really, the vestry has to approve that? And the vestry would say, what do you mean we can't fire the head? So if any of these are going on, it's a time to really pay attention to the church-school relationship. And these are the 5 big tension points. All of these things cause tension from one time or another. And I've never seen a church-school relationship where it's smooth sailing 100% of the time. So it's not about if things are going to create tension. It's about when we have friction, how do we resolve it? In other words, when we have a point of contention, how do we continue to work in relationship with each other through it, because we know it's going to come at some point. Money, power, and space, those are the big 3. And mission can be an issue if the parish feels the school has strayed from its mission. And sometimes you just, doggone it, you just get personality differences. The rector and the head just don't like each other. What are you going to do? Again, being open about this and saying, oh, look, we're having a friction point around space. We knew that might happen. How can we resolve that? So if you don't pay attention to this, there will be a crash. You will just find yourself just like this car. It's like, how do we end up in the middle of this wall? And someone will, it all terms to blame and shame about how we ended up with the car crashed in the wall. And that's when people call the lawyers. And if you are dealing with lawyers, it's always a bad idea. Something's gone way wrong. So one of the things that we talk about here at NAES is how to live in an active relationship. And going back to that image I had of the coming apart, the question is, how do we hold ourselves together? I would point out in this diagram that the rector and vestry words on this diagram are only the tiniest bit higher in the diagram than the head and the board. In other words, they're not truly hierarchical. They're more like this. That's to recognize the hierarchy of the rector and vestry, but to emphasize that in practice, functionally, what works best is for the rector and vestry and the head of the board to work as partners and to think of each other as missional partners rather than as a hierarchy. Now, every chancellor of every diocese and every attorney will tell you that if you're one corporation, the only legal entity is the rector and the vestry, and that is true. However, in reality, to make things work, you gotta work like this, because the school is sufficiently complicated that and the space and the money and the mission, that working like this makes it work best. And in the middle, you have your shared mission and your shared life. In my experience, rectors and vestries and heads and boards don't spend a lot of time talking about what that baby blue part looks like and attending to it. So this is one sort of visual that can help you get your mind around how this might work. So at the very beginning of the webinar, I talked about, could the church and the school leadership sit down and really name the ways that the school and the church have a common mission? Can the rector and the vestry say, oh, this is the way our school's an Episcopal school? And can the head of school or director of the preschool say, these are the qualities at our school that we inherit and that we're proud of because we're attached to this Episcopal church? Can we recognize that we have very different needs and expressions? Don't expect the school to be a church. Don't expect the church to be a school. We're different. We're going to have different ways we operate, different ways we might make decisions. It's okay. Let's just honor the best practice. The church should follow the best practices for churches, and the school should follow best practices for independent schools. Yes, it's an Episcopal school, but it's really in that sector of private independent schools. And then how do we keep that common mission thread, that thread moving through? It's communication and collaboration. That's how you hold that blue part together. If you don't have communication and collaboration, that little dotted line, think of it as a thread, it's going to pop right up and out and poof, away you go. So the communication and collaboration is really, really important. Even if you have everything, you've got the common mission, you understand your different needs, you know what goes in that baby blue box, and you don't communicate and collaborate, the natural law of entropy is going to make it all fade away again. So what does communication and collaboration look like? There's three ways, three key components. The left is having systems, policies, procedures, committees, etc. You have bylaws, you have protocols, you know who pays for what. On the right-hand side, you have a calendar, and the smaller your school and or the more embedded your shared space is, the more you need your calendar. Because schools run from September to June, churches run from January to December, churches run on the seasons of the church year, schools run on the seasons of the school year. How many times have school heads gotten themselves in trouble because they thought spring break, AKA Holy Week, was a perfect time to do a major construction project? How many times have parishes got in trouble because they didn't realize that on a certain day, AKA graduation day, everything had to be spit shining, even though it was some random day in June? And then the third is the most important in the middle, is those relationships. And if we are going to call ourselves Episcopalians, or Episcopal organizations or entities, we have to live in relationship, because that's the whole heart of what it means to live in the Episcopal Church and in the Episcopal way. So these are the conditions for a healthy relationship. To the extent that you don't have these, if you went down and gave yourself a grade of, check plus, check, check minus in the great elementary school mode, to the extent that you have check minuses on this list, you're probably going to have a little more choppy sailing in your relationship than if you can check off some check pluses. I'm going to go a little bit into governance in a minute about what that looks like. We do whole other trainings on governance, and it's a whole topic unto itself. But understanding what's the role of the vestry, what's the role of the board, what's the authority of the vestry, what's the authority of the school. Attitude of partnership. I have heard many times people are very proud to say that, oh, the school just runs itself. We really don't have to pay attention to it. Well, I wouldn't recommend that as an approach. Many new rectors call me, brand new rectors call me, and they say, I've been rector for 2 months, and in the search they told me I wouldn't really have anything to do with the school, but all I'm doing is spending all my time with the school. So competent and knowledgeable staff. If you have a school, whoever is doing the school books and handling the money has to understand school finances. We're big believers in the school having its own bookkeeper, its own CFO, its own business manager, its own bank accounts, and its own cash flow. However, if there's one person doing the books for the school and the church, they have to understand school finance, tuition payable, tuition receivable, all that stuff. To the extent that you all have mechanisms in place, how are we going to plan for capital improvements? How are we going to plan for events? How are we going to report budgets back and forth? So it's not reactive all the time. So it's not, the vestry only hears when there's a problem. Clarifying roles and responsibilities, collaboration on long-range planning, and regular communications. And I've got lots of ideas I'm going to share with you. So we have 10 minutes left. I'm going to go through a couple slides, and I'm going to stop for any questions or comments. We talk here at NAES that the vestry should have an oversight role, not a direct governance role. They oversee the school, especially if you're one corporation. Now, if you're not one corporation, give me a call. Depends on what kind of other corporation the school is. But generally, most of our parish day schools are one corporation with their parish. That means the ultimate authority rests with the vestry. The vestry is the corporation. That being said, remember I said earlier, vestry doesn't have the time or expertise to run a school. The vestry oversees these 5 big buckets. The board executes those 5 big buckets. So in a sense, think of the vestry as Rome and think of the board as Gaul. You know, the Roman emperor can't be off in Gaul, but can say to the governor of Gaul, hey, how are things going over there in Gaul? Is your budget balanced? Have you're founding more villages over there or what? But the vestry oversees and the board directly governs in the same areas. That back and forth arrow means you have reporting and communication back and forth because there are decisions that must be reserved by the vestry. What are we going to do with the property? Is the school running in the black? What's the mission of the school? And there are things that the board should be able to do on its own. There are things you have to do together. So the last slide I'm going to show you before I ask for any questions or comments is, we generally set it up in this kind of an image. So here's your vestry with the governance oversight. And then down there you have the school board with direct governance. And in the middle, that thread, right, you have 2 big buckets of elements that must be in place. On the left, you typically have bylaws and a school board, maybe you call it a school committee, a school board, and you make sure that you have a document, normally called bylaws, that defines the charge and authority of the board and what is reserved to the vestry. You also have great crossover representation, such as the rector always sits as a voting member of the board, actively involved. You probably have a vestry or member on the board or 2. You probably have parishioners on the board, along with some parents and some former parents and other people. But if you have enough parish and vestry and rector presence in that board meeting and in that board work, it's very hard for the church and school not to know what's going on at the highest level. One place that churches and schools tend to be historically weak is in this right-hand section, protocols, committees, and reporting. Do you have a written document that says how you determine the use of space? Do you have a written document that says how the finances work? Do you have times of year when you check in so that the church, when it's doing its budget, knows what's coming down the pike and the school knows what's coming down the pike, and you are regularly communicating? And I have a document of a sample school board calendar that actually has in it those touch points. For instance, the rector should always make a report at the board meeting. Every board meeting, the rector should give a rector's report about what's going on at the church and what the vestry's up to. Does the school head and board chair come to the vestry at least a few times a year? Is there a state of the school report that's communicated to the vestry every year, face to face? Don't rely on a vestry liaison. Get the school head and the board chair in the room with the vestry, face to face, ask and answer questions, look at the budget, go over whatever you may be discussing. And on committees too, anything that's part of that shared life, strategic planning, space planning, you do it together. Make a task force on the plan, task force on strategic planning, task force on this, task force on that. So these are the big areas that the vestry and board must coordinate. So you do not need, the vestry need not wonder why there's 18 2-year-olds and not 19 2-year-olds, or how high the, how many markers there are in the classroom. They do need to be thinking about, do we know if the school's financially solvent? Do we have a way to share space? Are we talking together about leadership changes? When the lay pension and medical benefits come through general convention, does the school know that applies to them too? So I'm going to stop here for a moment. Oh no, I'm sorry. 5 minutes. If you only take one thing away from church-school relations today, it's these 6 things. We talk about living by the rule of no surprises, and this is a two-way street. But to the extent that you are parish leaders, if any of these things are being discussed in the parish and they're going to affect the school must be part of the conversation, not part of the delivery of the final decision that you've already arrived at. As you begin to talk, get the school involved. Similarly, the board needs to do the same thing. If the school is thinking about anything in these areas that could affect the parish's life or program or budget, The school needs to say to the vestry and the rector, hey, I think we need to have a conversation about finances. I think we need to have a conversation about space. So if nothing else, live by the rule of no surprises. Here at NAES, anything that affects one another, you talk about together. Again, technically it's a hierarchy, and the church can just tell the school, but it works better if you talk like this, because no one likes to be blindsided. So if there's been blindsiding going on in your church-school relationship, putting together some conversation together, it takes a lot more time and effort, but it's so worth it. So I'm going to stop here and ask you if you have questions or comments, Brendan, and we only have 5 minutes, so why don't I stop there, and I'm going to go through these, and I'm going to leave this on the screen. But any questions, comments, ideas that may be coming through on the chat, or that people want to raise their hand and ask about?
Yeah, so thanks, thank you. And we have a question from Jules asking, all school board meetings are closed to the board only, and is the rector a voting member?
Rector should be a voting member, yes. The rector should be a voting member of the board and should attend all board meetings. In addition, the rector should meet once a week with the head of school. The rector should probably also sit on the executive committee of the board. And I really like it if the rector sits on the nominating committee of the board. And that way you can clarify all the big issues way, 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 way ahead of time. So in our view, the rector should be not the board chair, because the rector's too busy, but should be an active, present, voting, engaged member of the board.
And I think the other part of that was whether or not all the school board meetings should be closed.
It is the tradition of school governance, like most nonprofit governance, that school board meetings are not open to the public. I mean, I suppose someone could petition the board to come before the board, but I'll tell you, I've been, for 20 years, I've either been a school head or I've sat on school boards, some of them Episcopal and some of them non-Episcopal, probably 7 different school boards. Never have we had an open board meeting. Now, if you have constituencies on the board, like some boards have, the parent association comes to boards meetings to make a report. You might have a faculty member that comes and makes a report. Then the board might do that part, but then they'll go into executive session and it's only board members. But remember, the board includes parishioners, includes vestry members. If it's diocesan school, it includes the bishop or the bishop's representative. But that's just the way nonprofit governance runs and independent school governance runs. Because the board is the corporation on behalf of the vestry. But yeah, it's not a practice that's done in independent schools and nonprofits.
Great, thank you, Anne. And before we wrap up this evening, I just want to ask one question that may or may not be there for our participants, and that's why should their school be joining NAES? If there's the question of like, oh, we're just a small little preschool, or we've been so long, as an independent school anyways, what does it really matter? What would be your like top reason or reasons that they should definitely make sure they're looped into NAES?
Well, the top reason or reasons, and speaking to the folks on this particular webinar, which is for rectors and vestry members, we are the place where churches and schools can work together on questions of Episcopal identity, leadership, and governance. We're really the only organization that's devoted to that. We work with how to understand what an Episcopal school is. We work really closely with chaplains and clergy designated to serve in the role as chaplain on chapel and worship, helping schools understand what would an appropriate religious studies program look like at their school, whether you're a preschool. And we work a lot on governance and identity. So for instance, most of our school heads come out of the secular world and we have to educate them about, now they're in an Episcopal school. Most of our rectors and clergy may not have had much contact with a school in their seminary training or in their other training, and so we can help folks with governance. The last thing I'll say is that the school is the member, not individual people. And when you're a parish day school or a Episcopal school that's affiliated with another Episcopal entity, that entity is a member as well. The rector, the vestry, Anybody, it's a package deal. So if you are a leader in a parish day school and you have a school, if your school joins, the vestry and the rector get all the same benefits of membership that the school does. We do webinars like this for our own constituency, white papers, resources on our website. We have a chaplains group, a chaplains mentoring program. So many people don't understand that the parish is part of the membership.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Thank you, Anne. And Chrissy has a couple questions which may take a little bit, but we'll definitely try and get to all that right now before we wrap up for the evening. And she's asking, should the head of school attend church staff meetings?
Can I ask Chrissy, how big is her school?
Sure. If Chrissy would like to type that in.
And what grades?
Go ahead and type that in. She's also asking, what level of financial oversight should the vestry provide? For example, should the vestry request the school to get additional bids or addition bids?
All right. If you're a parish day school, like a parish elementary school or preschool, I think it's great for the head of school to attend church staff meetings. I attended church staff meetings every week, and my school is pre-K to grade 8. There was a lot of stuff going on in staff meeting I didn't really need to listen to, but I sure understood the church a lot better by going to church staff meetings. And that's where we hashed out the calendar. The rector was there, I was there, the maintenance guy was there, the director of music was there, and that's where the parish administrator was there, and that's where we hashed out, okay, Lessons and Carols is coming up for the school. When can the rehearsals be in the church for the lower school? And with the rector in the head and everybody in the room, done and done. And none of this email bounce around business. So I would say yes. The second thing is level of financial oversight. I think this vestry can ask the school for its policies and make sure they're responsible financial policies like bids. Those might be a little bit different. Generally, the vestry approves the board's annual budget to make sure not what they're spending on different things, but is it positive or not, and does it seem reasonable? And generally, the vestry, if the school is separately audited, which many of our schools are, the vestry should get a copy of the school's audited financial statements. And the vestry should ask the school to demonstrate that it is following best practices. So rather than saying, should they get more bids, it would be, does the school have a financial procedures and policies manual? Does it have policies about check signing? Does it have a policy about bids? Does it have a policy about petty cash? So that might be the better question.
Yeah, and Chrissy was just added that the school is 2 years old to kindergarten with 136 kids.
All right, so that's sufficiently complicated. You'd be called sort of on the bigger side of a preschool. So yeah, I think it would be great if the head could come to staff meetings, or if not every staff meeting, if the head could come and say, on these 2 staff meetings a month, they're calendar meetings, and the head comes and we do the next 6 weeks out, or we do, the skeleton calendar for the school or whatever it might be. I don't think it's a bad idea. I did it for 12 years, so every week, like clockwork.
And last but not least, before we'll definitely finish up, was just a question of, are you affiliated with the National Church? Which I think we can both answer for both of our respective organizations, but go first, Anne.
We are not affiliated with the National Church. And I'll very quickly say, because we're running late, back in 1965, there was a division of schools, or an office of schools, in the National Church, and the church decided to spin that off at General Convention. I believe it was actually just a financial decision at the time. At that time, NAES was separately incorporated as a voluntary membership association. We are completely independent of the Episcopal Church. However, because of that historical relationship, we are housed at 815 2nd Avenue. So that is where I am in my office, at 815 2nd Avenue. And we maintain very, very close relationships with our bishops, with folks like ECF and ERD, and our presiding bishop is always at our every other year convention. We're very excited that Bishop Curry will be with us in Atlanta in 2018. And you should also know that we regularly communicate. We welcome all of our new bishops, and we welcome them with a welcome packet and send them a list of their Episcopal schools. So we work closely with the church, but we are not officially, legally part of the church. We don't get any money from General Convention either.
Yeah, thank you. And then I will just answer as well, just in case that was also part of that, but for everyone's reference as well, that the Episcopal Church Foundation was, we were actually established as a completely separate organization in 1949. Again, our mission and service is to the Episcopal Church, but we are separate. We don't receive any funding from General Convention, but of course we work very closely with bishops and all the organizations. The National Church staff, of course, is very important for us, but this is one way that independent Episcopal organizations like NAES and ECF, that we look to partner and work with each other to support the mission ministry of Episcopal congregations and schools. So thank you, Anne, so much for preparing this valuable information on the leadership between churches and schools. Thank you to our folks tuning in both live over Facebook and for your comments there, as well as in this webinar this evening.
And I would volunteer that if you would like to talk offline with me at any time, please feel free to contact me. www.episcopalschools.org is our website. Our contact information is there. We're always happy to hear from you and to help you in any way we can.
And likewise here with ECF, just let us know. There's some great resources on episcopalschools.org, as well as some great stuff we've had by Anne as well on ECF auto practices on ECF. So thank you all again for attending tonight, and wish you all the best and blessings in your ministry. Thank you.
God bless everybody.